It starts as a quiet drive through the Colorado mountains. Or maybe it is the trap he planned all along. When a pregnant woman is locked inside an SUV by her own husband, and he pours gasoline around the car before setting it on fire in the freezing night, you would think her story ends there. But instead of saving her, he jumps into his mistress's car and speeds away like nothing ever happened. What he does not know is that fate has other plans, because in that exact life or death moment, a single father appears and drags her away from the edge of death. What follows is a battle of survival, hidden truth, and a level of justice no one sees coming. Trust me, you will not guess how far this goes until we dive in. Tell us what time you are watching and where you are tuning in from. Drop a comment below. We would love to hear from you. The late afternoon light was fading over the Colorado mountains, and the wind carried a sharp cold that rattled through the tall pine trees. Grace Whitman sat quietly in the passenger seat of her husband's dark SUV, one hand resting over her stomach where the small flutter of her 14-week pregnancy made her feel both fragile and hopeful. A dull headache pulsed behind her eyes, but she tried to hide it. Andrew had insisted this drive would help her relax. He said the mountain air would be good for her. She wanted to believe him. She always wanted to believe him. Andrew kept one hand on the steering wheel while the other hovered constantly near his phone. Every time it buzzed, he glanced down with a tightness around his mouth that Grace had never seen before. She tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the scenery outside. The sky was slipping from gold to gray. The temperature had dropped to 45 degrees, chilling the windows. Another vibration lit the screen. When Andrew loosened his grip to adjust the heat controls, Grace saw the message clearly. Zhong Chua, when are you coming to me? The name above it, Lila, stabbed her in the chest. Her breath caught. It was not English, but she understood enough. She knew betrayal when it unfolded in front of her. Andrew had someone else, someone impatient, someone waiting. She swallowed hard. The small pulse of life in her belly fluttered again, this time with unease. Andrew must have sensed the shift in her breathing because he stiffened, then abruptly took a turn he had not mentioned earlier. The road narrowed, climbing higher through the mountains. It was quieter here, more isolated. The trees pressed closer, and there were no houses in sight. The sky darkened quickly. Grace watched the temperature drop on the dashboard. 44, 43. She rubbed her arms and tried to steady her breathing. Andrew, where are we going? She asked softly. Just clearing my head, he muttered, eyes fixed ahead. He did not look at her. Minutes later, he pulled the SUV to a stop on a lonely stretch of road. No cars passed, no lights glowed, only the wind whispered through the pines. Grace felt a shiver move down her spine. Before she could speak, Andrew stepped out and slammed the door. She reached for her phone out of instinct, but it was gone from her lap. She looked up in time to see Andrew walk to the edge of the embankment and hurl something downward. Her phone. She heard it clatter against rocks far below. Andrew, what are you doing? She cried. He returned to her door, opened it, and pushed her backward against the seat. His face was twisted with anger she had never seen. That baby might not even be mine, he snapped. You think I don't know what you're capable of? His breath smelled like whiskey and resentment. Grace tried to shield her stomach. Stop, please. I have never lied to you, Grace whispered. But her voice trembled so badly that the words fell apart. Andrew stepped back and slammed the door shut. Grace heard the clicking sound of the locks, engaging from the outside. Panic wrapped around her. She tugged at the handle. It refused to budge. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. Through the fogged window, she watched Andrew walk to the back of the vehicle. He opened the trunk and dragged out a red gasoline can. Her lungs froze. She hit the window with her palm, shouting for him to stop. The cold glass numbed her skin. He ignored her entirely. He poured a wide circle of fuel around the SUV. The fumes seeped through the cracks of the door, sharp and nauseating. Grace gagged and pounded harder, desperate for him to look at her, to remember that she was his wife, that she carried his child. But he would not turn. Andrew struck a lighter. The spark flared. Then flames rippled along the gasoline like hungry serpents, racing toward the vehicle. Grace screamed and tried to force the seatbelt off, but her hands shook uncontrollably. Smoke began to curl from beneath the hood as heat pushed against the glass. Andrew did not spare her a glance. He walked away toward a second truck, pulled off the road, one she had not seen earlier. A woman sat inside the driver's seat. Even through the blur of smoke, Grace recognized Lila's silhouette. Andrew climbed in beside her. The truck rolled forward and disappeared around the bend. Fire spread quickly along the exterior of the SUV. The smell of burning rubber filled the cabin. Grace coughed violently, unable to get enough air. Her eyes watered. Her throat burned. She pulled at the seatbelt until her arms ached. Her vision blurred. The baby. The thought screamed inside her. She pressed a hand to her stomach. The small heartbeat she had seen on the ultrasound, the life she had whispered to every night, was now trapped with her in a steel coffin filling with smoke. She tried the other door. Locked. She tried kicking the window, but her legs were weak. The smoke thickened, swirling like dark fog. Her chest tightened. Each breath felt heavier, harder. Please, someone help me, please. The flames reached the sides of the SUV. The metal crackled. The air grew unbearably hot. Grace's head spun. She pushed her face against the small gap between the seat and door, searching for air, but there was none left to offer her relief. Her heartbeat pounded irregularly now, frightened and rapid. Sweat mixed with tears. Her legs went numb. She realized with horrifying clarity that she might never see the baby grow. She might never feel tiny hands around her finger. She might never escape this burning cage. Her vision dimmed around the edges. She heard the roar of flames, the groan of metal, and the distant howl of wind moving through the trees. Everything else faded. And in that final flicker of consciousness, Grace understood the truth. Andrew had left her here to die. No one knew she was here. No one would find her, unless a miracle happened soon. Evan Cole guided his old pickup truck along the winding Colorado road while the late afternoon sky faded toward a bluish gray. His daughter Lily sat in the back seat with her violin case strapped beside her, humming softly after her weekly music lesson. Evan glanced at her through the mirror with quiet pride. Life as a single father had never been easy, but he had built a steady rhythm that worked for both of them. After years as a firefighter, then a sudden shift into a repair job that kept him closer to home, he had learned the importance of being present. He never wasted moments with his daughter. He chose the mountain route because it was usually empty at that hour and because he liked the peaceful view. The air was crisp and carried the smell of pine. Lily continued humming until she suddenly paused and pointed ahead. Evan followed the direction of her hand and saw a thin column of smoke rising into the sky. At first, he assumed it was from a campsite, but the smoke shifted, dark and heavy, with a rhythm he recognized from years on rescue crews. It was the kind of smoke that came from burning metal and rubber. His instincts reacted before his thoughts. Smoke like that meant danger. He felt a familiar surge of adrenaline push through him, the same force that once rushed through his limbs whenever an alarm rang at the station. He slowed the truck and pulled to the side of the road. Lily leaned forward between the seats. Her eyes widened. "Daddy, that looks like a car fire." Evan nodded once, already calculating distance, wind direction, and heat. "Call 911, he said. He passed her his phone because hers had run out of battery earlier. She unlocked it with quick fingers and started speaking to the dispatcher, while Evan stepped out into the icy air. The cold hit him immediately, but the heat from the distant flames pressed against his face a moment later. He estimated roughly 50 feet between his truck and the burning vehicle ahead. That distance was safer, but not safe enough. The fire could spread or cause the gas tank to explode without warning. He jogged forward carefully and pulled his jacket collar over his mouth. The smoke thickened the closer he got. Wind gusts carried sparks across the asphalt. He saw the shape of a dark SUV, with flames licking up along its lower frame. The windows were fogged with smoke, and the engine compartment glowed with a dangerous orange pulse. As he approached from the side, he spotted a figure inside. Someone was moving. Someone was pounding on the passenger window with terrified force. A woman. He sprinted toward the door. The heat was fierce, like standing too close to an open oven. The metal warped in places. Evan saw her through the smoke-coated glass. Her face was streaked with soot, and she waved frantically at him. She was coughing violently, trying to move away from the rapid spread of the fire near her feet. Her fear struck him in a way that felt almost physical. He checked quickly for any way to open the door, but the handle was locked and too hot to grip. He backed up and ran to his truck. Inside the emergency kit, he kept a short-handled shovel, originally meant for digging tires out of snow. He grabbed it and rushed back. The first strike against the window did nothing. The sound echoed like hitting stone. He struck again, adjusting the angle. SUV windows were designed to resist force. They were meant to protect passengers during accidents, but now that protection was trapping her inside. The smoke swirled heavily, and the woman pounded from the inside, her movements growing weaker. He looked down at his hands. The skin on one already felt warm and tight from the heat. He yanked off his leather jacket and wrapped it around his forearm twice. The extra padding might help shield him for a few seconds. He pressed his protected arm against the upper corner of the glass and used the blade of the shovel to target the thin edge where the structure weakened slightly. "Daddy, hurry!" Lily cried from the road. He heard her voice tremble. He needed to finish before the flames reached the cabin. He struck 3 times. On the 4th strike, the corner of the window cracked. The fracture spread in a spiderweb pattern. He repositioned the shovel and hammered again. The center of the window buckled inward, and the entire pane shattered with a rush of hot air and smoke. The force nearly knocked him back. He leaned in immediately. The woman coughed as fresh air touched her face. Evan reached inside without hesitation. The heat burned through the leather jacket, but he ignored it. He grabbed her arms and pulled. She resisted at first, not from fear, but because her seatbelt held her in place. She fumbled at the buckle with trembling fingers until it released. The moment she was free, he pulled her out with all his strength. Her clothes were streaked with soot. Her hair was singed at the ends. Heat radiated from her back. He lifted her away from the vehicle as quickly as he could and half-carried, half-supported her across the cracked pavement. When they were far enough, he lowered both of them to the ground. The cold dirt helped cool her clothing, and he rolled her gently to smother any lingering sparks. A loud explosion erupted behind them. The SUV's fuel line had ignited. The fiery blast sent a wave of heat over their bodies. Evan shielded her with his arms. She curled against him, barely conscious. When the shock faded, he checked her breathing. It was shallow but steady. She opened her eyes with difficulty. He saw fear in them, along with relief and exhaustion. She tried to speak, but her voice rasped painfully. "You are safe now. I have got you," he said. He kept his voice low and steady so she could understand him, despite the ringing in her ears. She blinked slowly and let her head rest against his chest. Her body trembled from smoke inhalation and shock. Evan held her carefully, making sure her lungs were expanding evenly. He could feel a faint tremor along her abdomen, a protective instinct that made him tighten his hold just a little more. Behind them, flames roared into the darkening sky. Evan did not look back. His attention stayed on the woman who had nearly died in front of him, and who, for reasons he did not yet understand, mattered more than he expected in that moment. The flashing red and blue lights arrived only 7 minutes after Lily's frightened call. The sound of sirens echoed through the trees and bounced against the cold stone of the mountainside. Evan stepped back to give the firefighters room as they rushed toward the burning wreck. He kept one hand braced under Grace's shoulders. Her breathing was shallow, and her face was streaked with soot. A thin line of blood trailed from her left nostril. She trembled from shock, exhaustion, and the cold Colorado air that pressed against her smoke-heated skin. Paramedics hurried over with oxygen equipment. They lifted her gently, but even that small movement made her wince. A mask was placed over her mouth. She drew in several unsteady breaths as the fresh oxygen helped push away the fog that clouded her mind. The fire crew moved quickly to extinguish the remaining flames. Evan watched them work, knowing exactly what they would find inside. By some miracle, she had escaped before the vehicle collapsed into molten ruin. He looked up when he heard the sound of another engine. To his disbelief, a familiar truck rolled toward the scene. Andrew stepped out before the vehicle even fully stopped. Lila followed him, her hair perfectly styled despite the chaos around them. They looked out of place among the smoke, fire residue, and frantic emergency workers. Evan's stomach tightened. They should not have been there. They had clearly circled back once they saw the sirens. They needed to control the story. Andrew rushed forward with an exaggerated expression of shock. He pressed a hand to his forehead as if crushed by grief. "What happened here?" he cried loudly. "My wife. She must have done something reckless. She has not been herself. I told her this road was dangerous." His voice cracked in a way that almost sounded convincing. Almost. Lila pulled out her phone and began recording with tears that looked conveniently placed. "She threatened us," she said to the nearest officer. "She said she would hurt herself and blame us. We did not know how to help her. She drove off before we could calm her down." Her voice quivered. It could have fooled anyone who was not watching her eyes. They were too alert and calculating. A paramedic called for more oxygen as they prepared to move Grace toward the ambulance. A doctor who had arrived with the emergency response stepped close and examined the soot around her lips. "She inhaled a dangerous amount of smoke," he said. "This could affect the pregnancy. We need to get her to the hospital immediately." Grace's eyelids fluttered. She could hear the words, and each one cut deeper than the last. Evan remained beside her until Andrew pushed between them with forced authority. "Stay away from my wife," he snapped. "You have done enough." His glare was sharp, familiar, spiteful. Evan held his ground, but he did not speak. This was not the moment to confront him. Grace opened her eyes for a moment and searched the crowd until she found Evan's face. Fear and gratitude glimmered there. She could not speak, but the message was clear. Two officers pulled Andrew aside for questioning. They also asked Lila to wait nearby. Evan gave the officers a brief account of what he witnessed, but Andrew overheard and scoffed loudly. "He is pretending to be a hero," Andrew said. "My wife must have panicked and crashed the car. Look at him. He just wants attention." The officers took notes, but said nothing. Grace was lifted onto a stretcher. She clutched the oxygen mask and tried to breathe against the rising panic. Andrew rushed after the paramedics. "I need to go with her," he insisted. "She is my wife. She needs me." He spoke with urgency, but there was something hollow beneath the performance. Still, the medical team allowed him to ride in the ambulance after confirming he was not obstructing their work. Evan tried to follow, but Andrew turned his head sharply. "Stay away from my family," he hissed. A paramedic gently stopped Evan from stepping closer. With no choice, Evan watched the ambulance doors close. The vehicle pulled away with its siren cutting through the mountain air. At the hospital, Grace was placed in a trauma room. Machines beeped around her as doctors placed monitors on her chest and stomach. A nurse adjusted the oxygen mask, while another checked her vitals. Andrew stood near the foot of the bed, pacing and checking his phone repeatedly. When a police officer stepped inside to fill out the incident report, Andrew immediately positioned himself as the authority. "She was unstable," he said. "She was emotional. She said she did not want to live. You have to understand the pressure she is under." End quote. The officer glanced at Grace. She was conscious but barely able to speak. Her throat burned with every attempt to form words. She tried to lift her hand to signal disagreement, but her strength was gone. Her heart rate monitor beeped faster. Outside the room, Evan stood in the hallway with his hands clenched. He refused to leave until he knew she was safe. He saw Andrew storm out of the room to answer a call. The moment the door shut behind him, Evan stepped inside. Grace lifted her gaze to him. Her voice was faint and broken. "He wants to kill me." The confession was almost a whisper, but it carried the weight of truth. Evan froze. For a moment, everything inside him went still. Then a resolve he had not felt in years settled firmly onto his shoulders. He nodded once, the quiet pledge forming in his chest. He would not let Andrew harm her again. Behind him, the hallway lights flickered softly. The chaotic night was beginning to shift. Soon, the truth would start to push through the lies. The hospital lights glowed with a cool white haze that made the long hallway feel colder than it really was. Evan stood near the window, staring at the parking lot far below, while he held his phone to his ear. His voice was low but firm. He had called an old friend from the fire department, someone who had spent more than a decade analyzing vehicle fires. As Evan described the SUV's condition, his friend responded without hesitation. The vehicle could not have ignited on its own. The fire behavior pointed to an accelerant. When Evan heard the words, he felt the truth tighten like a knot in his chest. Someone had started that fire intentionally. He thanked his friend and slipped the phone back into his pocket. His pulse beat harder. The thought of Grace trapped inside that burning car replayed in his mind. He could still see her hand against the smoke-coated glass. He could still feel the weight of her trembling body as he carried her away from the flames. The idea that someone had done this to her on purpose filled him with a steady, controlled anger. Inside the hospital room, Grace had been moved from the trauma unit to a regular patient room. The machines had been reduced to only a few monitors, but she still breathed heavily. Her voice remained weak, and every intake of air seemed to require careful effort. She kept one hand lightly over her stomach. The doctors had reassured her that the baby was stable for now, but she needed rest and oxygen. Andrew had insisted the hospital restrict visitors. He claimed it was for Grace's safety. In reality, he wanted to control who reached her and what she might reveal. Evan knew that. The nurses knew it too, though they could not say so openly. Andrew had been pacing the hallway for nearly an hour, making calls and demanding updates on Grace's condition. His behavior was erratic, but polished enough that someone less observant might believe his concern was genuine. When Andrew finally stepped outside to answer yet another phone call, Evan seized the brief window of opportunity. He walked quietly to Grace's door and slipped inside. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic. The only sounds were the soft hum of the air purifier and Grace's shallow breaths. She opened her eyes slowly when she sensed movement. Her face relaxed when she recognized him. "Evan," she whispered. Her voice was thin, almost fragile. He stepped closer to the bed. "I talked to someone who knows about fires," he said gently. "The car did not burn on its own. Someone set it." He waited to see if she would deny it or try to cover her fear. Instead, her hand trembled. "It was Andrew," she said. The words came slowly, shaped by exhaustion and dread. He locked the doors. He poured gasoline. I tried to scream. He lit the fire and walked away. The memory tightened her voice until she had to pause and catch her breath. Evan felt a heaviness settle in his chest. Hearing her confirm it made the situation real in a way even the fire had not. "Grace, you have to tell the police," he said. "You cannot carry this alone. They need to know what he did." She shook her head weakly. "If I accuse him now, he will hurt me. Or he will hurt the baby. He always finds ways to control everything." Her eyes glistened with fear. "I cannot lose this child." Before Evan could reply, the door swung open. Andrew stormed in with a burst of loud, angry footsteps. His eyes locked onto Evan, and his face darkened. "What are you doing here?" he barked. "I told the staff she needs rest. Get out." Grace flinched at the volume in Andrew's voice. Evan straightened, refusing to be intimidated. Andrew stepped closer, gripping Grace's arm in a way that made her wince. Evan reacted instantly. He lifted his phone and hit record, holding it high enough to capture the image of Andrew's hand squeezing her wrist. Andrew realized too late what he had done. He jerked his hand back, but the damage was done. Evan had the footage. Without speaking, he stepped past Andrew and left the room. Andrew cursed under his breath, but he did not follow. He knew there was nothing he could do now without making the situation worse. Evan walked straight to the small office near the nurses' station, where the local police chief was waiting to gather additional statements. He showed the chief the video. The officer watched it twice, his expression tightening. He had already been skeptical of Andrew's story, and the new evidence deepened his suspicion. The chief thanked Evan and promised to move forward quietly until they had enough to confront Andrew directly. Word began to spread through hospital staff and eventually through town. Photographs of Evan carrying Grace from the fire appeared online. Articles began to surface, calling him the Mountain Hero Dad. People praised his courage and the tenderness with which he protected Grace in every photo. Evan ignored the attention. He did not save her to be admired. He saved her because she had needed someone when no one else had come. In Grace's room, the nurses adjusted her pillows and helped her sit up. She kept glancing toward the door, afraid Andrew would return with more anger. When Evan entered again, her posture softened. He approached slowly so she would not feel rushed. "Andrew wants me to sign a report," she whispered. "He says it will help close the case." He wants me to say it was an accident. Evan pulled a chair close to her bed. Do not sign anything, he said. His voice was gentle but strong. He is trying to protect himself. You deserve the truth to be heard. You and your baby deserve safety. Her hands shook slightly. I am scared, she admitted. Every time I try to stand up to him, he finds a way to break me. Evan leaned forward, his tone steady. You are not alone now. I will not let him hurt you again. For the first time since the fire, Grace let out a breath that did not tremble. She believed him, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a small flicker of safety growing within her. Night settled heavily over the hospital, bringing a quiet that felt uneasy rather than peaceful. The fluorescent lights in the hallway buzzed softly, while nurses moved in and out of rooms with slow, practiced steps. Grace slept with uneven breaths, aided by the oxygen tube that rested gently inside her nose. The doctors had told her to rest, but even in sleep her body remained tense from fear and exhaustion. Around 2 in the morning, the corridors were nearly empty. Andrew walked back into the hospital with a hood pulled over his head. He kept his gaze low, hoping not to draw attention. Earlier that day, he had been questioned by police and confronted by the suspicion building around him. Panic had begun to replace the confidence he once wore so easily. He needed to regain control, and he needed to do it before Grace told anyone the truth. He slipped quietly toward her room. The soft glow from the wall monitor cast a thin light over her resting form. Her skin looked pale, and her breathing remained slow but steady. Andrew closed the door behind him and approached her bed. He stared at the oxygen tube, the line that kept her breathing safely. His fingers twitched. If she stopped breathing now, the authorities would never get her full statement. The baby would be gone too. The entire problem would disappear before it ruined him. He reached toward the tube. His hand hovered over the connection point, and he prepared to pull. The hiss of the oxygen flow filled the quiet space. Then, the door swung open. Evan stepped inside, holding a cup of water he had brought for Grace in case she woke. When he saw Andrew with his hand on the oxygen line, his heart stopped for a split second. Then, fury surged up his spine. "What are you doing?" he demanded. His voice filled the room with sharp clarity. Andrew jerked his hand back as if burned. "I was checking on her," he snapped. "She was struggling to breathe." End quote. Evan did not hesitate. He crossed the room in 2 strides and shoved Andrew away from the equipment. The movement sent Andrew stumbling. Within seconds, both men collided in a flurry of anger and adrenaline. They grabbed at each other, knocking into the tray of medical supplies. A metal cup clattered onto the floor. Andrew swung first, striking Evan's shoulder. Evan responded with a blow to Andrew's arm, pushing him back again. Grace woke with a gasp, terrified by the sudden violence erupting beside her bed. Her heart monitor began to beep faster. Nurses heard the commotion and called security. 2 officers rushed down the hallway. When they burst inside, Andrew immediately pointed at Evan. "He attacked me," he shouted. "He is obsessed with my wife. He has been interfering for days." His acting was quick, almost reflexive, but the officers did not answer. One pointed up to the black dome camera fixed in the corner of the ceiling. The small red light blinked steadily. It had recorded everything. One officer requested security footage, and within minutes, the truth played on a monitor in the hallway. The footage showed Andrew reaching for the oxygen tube with clear intent. It showed Evan entering and reacting in defense. Andrew's face drained of color when the officers returned. They placed him in cuffs and walked him out of the room as he shouted protests. "You do not understand. I was trying to help her. I was checking her breathing." His voice echoed down the corridor. He was taken into custody. The hospital grew quiet again. Grace cried softly as the nurses adjusted her monitors. Evan stayed beside her, calming her with steady words. "You are safe," he repeated. "He cannot hurt you right now." She nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her trembling hand. 12 hours later, Andrew was released on bail. Lila appeared outside the station, surrounded by reporters. She cried into her hands, insisting that Andrew was innocent, that he was misunderstood, that he loved his wife. Cameras flashed as she clung to him dramatically. The scene spread across social media within minutes. Back at the hospital, the staff decided to transfer Grace to a secure unit on the upper floor. Visitors would be screened. Doors would remain locked. Evan watched nervously as she was moved. He requested a few days of leave from work so he could remain close. His supervisor understood and approved the time without hesitation. The next day, Grace placed her hand over her stomach and gasped softly. For the first time since the fire, she felt the faint flutter of movement. The sensation brought tears to her eyes. "The baby is moving again," she whispered. Relief washed over her, though fear remained close behind it. Meanwhile, Andrew's anger boiled. His plan had fallen apart. Grace was still alive. The police were questioning him. His business partners were calling. Lila's dramatic crying only made things worse. He could not let Grace win. He needed to intimidate her. So late that night, he drove to Evan's home, hoping to terrify the man who had interfered too many times. The house sat quietly under the dim porch light. Andrew approached the back door, trying to force the lock. Inside, Lily woke at the faint scraping sound. She sat up, frightened. She walked to Evan's room and shook his arm. He rose immediately and grabbed a flashlight before heading downstairs. He caught Andrew in the act. Andrew turned with wild eyes, but Evan held his ground. A tense standoff followed until neighbors noticed the shouting and called police. Andrew fled before officers arrived, disappearing into the darkness. The investigation deepened the next morning when police found evidence Andrew had purchased gasoline and a lighter at a nearby station on the same day as the fire. Detectives now suspected arson. Grace received a threatening message from Lila saying they would take everything back. The words sent a chill straight through her. Fear for her baby returned in full force. She could not stay exposed. Evan came to her bedside and took her hand gently. "Come stay with me and Lily," he said. "At least until things settle down. It is safer." Grace hesitated, torn between fear and pride. After several long moments, she nodded. She needed protection, and Evan offered it without hesitation. Evan and Lily welcomed her into their small wooden house near the foothills. Lily brought her blankets and painted pictures to cheer her up. Evan cooked simple meals and made sure she had everything she needed. Grace felt a warmth she had not felt in months. For the first time since the nightmare began, she felt peace slowly returning. The storm began earlier than anyone expected. Heavy snow rolled across the mountains with a force that felt almost unnatural. By nightfall, the wind had turned into a shrieking current that slammed against windows and pushed drifts of snow across the deserted road, leading to Evan's cabin. Weather alerts warned that temperatures could drop to dangerous levels within hours. Evan stood at the living room window and watched the snow swirl like white smoke through the dark air. He could feel the shift in the atmosphere. Something was coming, and it was not just the storm. His phone buzzed. It was a call from the police dispatcher. Andrew had escaped his home shortly after being confronted with the gasoline evidence. Officers believed he was armed, or at least carrying something dangerous. Stress, fear, and rage made him unpredictable. He had lost control of the narrative. The investigation was closing in. Evan felt a chill run down his spine as the dispatcher continued. Lila had vanished for 6 hours. She had not returned calls, and her car could not be located. Police suspected she was helping Andrew hide or move around the county without being detected. The possibility that both of them were working together again made Evan's hands tighten into fists. He hung up the phone and immediately dragged a wooden shelf against the front door. It was not much, but it created a barrier. The storm rattled the windows, making the glass vibrate with every gust. Grace sat on the couch with a blanket wrapped around her. She rubbed her stomach slowly, trying to calm herself. For the past hour, she had felt light cramps, likely caused by stress. She tried to breathe through them, but each new jolt of fear made her body tense again. Lily sat close beside her with wide eyes. She held on to Grace like she was afraid the storm would pull her away. The wind roared outside, a long, piercing sound that scraped against the wooden walls. Evan checked every lock twice. Then he checked them again. The cabin was sturdy, but nothing felt strong enough when he imagined Andrew outside in the freezing dark. A few minutes later, a sudden sound cut through the storm. Footsteps, slow and uneven. They crunched through the deep snow just outside the door. Evan reached for his flashlight and the flare gun he kept in a drawer for emergencies. His heart pounded. Snowstorms often created echoes, but these footsteps were too close and too deliberate to be a trick of the wind. Grace looked up with sudden fear. Lily clung tighter to her side. Evan stepped toward the door with cautious movements. He pressed his shoulder against the wood and listened. The footsteps stopped. Silence settled. Then came the creak of snow shifting under weight. He flicked the flashlight on and opened the door just enough to slip outside. The wind hit his face so hard that it stung like needles. Snow whipped around him. He shined the beam across the porch. No one stood there, but in the fresh snow were footprints, deep and fresh. They led toward the tree line before fading into the storm. He backed into the house and shut the door firmly. "Someone was out there," he said. Grace covered her stomach with both hands, feeling the baby move in startled reaction. Lily whimpered softly. The wind continued to lash against the windows, shaking them hard enough that the glass trembled. Electricity flickered overhead. The lights blinked off, then on again. The brief darkness felt like a warning. Grace gasped as another small wave of pain ran through her abdomen. Evan hurried to her side and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. He could feel her trembling. The storm outside intensified. Snow slammed against the cabin with a heavy, thudding rhythm. Another sound thudded suddenly from the back of the house. Lily screamed. Evan grabbed the flashlight and ran toward the kitchen. The back door shook violently, as if someone were forcing it from the outside. The wooden frame creaked under pressure. Evan slammed the bolt, locked down and braced the door with his body. The shaking continued for several seconds. Then it stopped as abruptly as it had started. His phone buzzed again. A text message from an unknown number lit up the screen. "Bring her outside." Evan felt the words like a drop in his stomach. The message could only come from one person. He showed the screen to Grace. Her face went pale. She struggled to steady her breathing. Moments later, the police sent another update. Andrew's phone signal had pinged on a nearby cell tower. He was within a half-mile of the cabin. The idea of him lurking somewhere in the storm made Evan's blood run cold. Grace tried to stand but felt faint. The stress and cold air had overwhelmed her. Her vision blurred, and she collapsed back onto the couch. Evan rushed to catch her before she fell. He checked her pulse. It was fast but steady. Her breathing was shallow. He lifted her gently in his arms and carried her to the bedroom. Lily followed close behind, crying quietly. He laid Grace on the bed and covered her with blankets. He brushed loose hair from her face and pressed his ear near her lips to be sure she was breathing. Another contraction of pain made her wince, and he soothed her with soft words. Outside, the wind screamed against the cabin like a living thing. Snow piled higher against the walls. Evan realized the house would not hold if Andrew forced his way in. They could not stay. Grace was too fragile, and Lily was too frightened. There was only one choice left. He went to the closet and pulled out coats, gloves, and thick scarves. He layered them over Lily and wrapped Grace carefully, trying not to disturb her breathing. She opened her eyes halfway and saw him preparing them. "Are we leaving?" she whispered. "Yes," he said. "We cannot stay here, not with him outside." He lifted her again with steady arms. Lily clutched his sleeve and stayed close to his leg. Evan looked down at her and spoke softly through the darkness. "Stay close. Do not let go." 12 to 12 EWs. He pushed the door open into the furious blizzard, holding Grace tightly against his chest while Lily clung to his side. The storm swallowed them instantly, but Evan kept moving. He would get them away from the danger, no matter what waited in the storm-filled night. The blizzard swallowed the world in white as Evan forced himself forward through the deepening snow. He carried Grace on his back, her arms loosely around his shoulders, her breathing soft but strained. Every few steps her forehead brushed against his neck as if she were drifting in and out of consciousness. Lily walked, pressed tightly against his side, clutching his jacket with trembling fingers. The storm had erased the road completely, leaving only the narrow forest path that Evan knew from hiking trips with his daughter. It was the only route that kept them hidden from the open fields, where Andrew might easily spot them. The cold cut into Evan's face like shards of glass. Snowflakes clung to his eyelashes, and every breath burned his lungs. Behind him, Grace shivered. He could feel her weakness through every shift of her weight. "Hold on," he murmured to her. "We are almost far enough from the cabin." She did not answer, but he felt her hand tighten slightly against his shirt. The wind screamed through the trees, bending branches until they creaked loudly. Lily stumbled, but kept walking, refusing to let go of Evan even for an instant. "Daddy, I am scared," she whispered. He put his free hand on her shoulder and guided her closer to him. "Stay with me. Do not look back," he said calmly. They reached a narrow clearing where tall pines sheltered them from the worst of the wind. Snow piled almost to Lily's knees. Evan paused for a moment, shifting Grace's weight higher on his back. Her cheek rested against him, cold and damp. He felt the faint tremble of pain running through her body. Then, a distant light flickered through the woods. A flashlight beam swept in slow arcs between the trees. Evan's heart dropped. The beam moved with searching purpose. Someone was out there. Someone close. The beam grew brighter. A dark figure stepped into the clearing from the opposite side of the forest. Andrew. His coat snapped in the wind, and his flashlight cut through the snowfall like a blade. His face twisted when he finally saw them. "Grace!" he shouted. "You belong with me. Come here." Evan instinctively stepped in front of Grace and Lily. His posture straightened, and his voice hardened. "Stop right there. You are not taking her." He could feel Lily grip him tighter from behind. Grace stirred weakly on his back, lifting her head with effort. Andrew took several staggering steps forward. "She is my wife," he roared. "She is not going anywhere with you. She owes me everything. She is mine." His voice broke through the wind like a violent rip in the storm. Snow swirled around him as if pulled by his fury. Evan remained calm, though adrenaline pounded through his veins. "You nearly killed her. You nearly killed your own child. Walk away now before the police reach you. They are already looking for you." Andrew's eyes widened with rage. He lunged toward them through the heavy snow. Evan twisted quickly, lowering Grace and Lily behind him. Andrew slammed into Evan with enough force to knock both of them into the snowbank. Cold powder exploded around them. Andrew clawed and swung with wild desperation. Evan blocked the hits with his arms and fought back with controlled strength, fueled by fear for the two people behind him. They rolled through the snow, their breaths mixing with the roar of the wind. Andrew grabbed Evan's jacket and tried to pin him down, but Evan used his momentum to shove him sideways. They slid across the icy surface, leaving a trail carved by their struggle. Grace pushed herself onto her knees, despite the sharp pain twisting through her abdomen. "Andrew, stop," she pleaded. Her voice cracked. A sudden spasm forced her to clutch her stomach. The pain was sharper this time, frighteningly intense. She gasped and lost her balance, falling onto her hands as the world spun. Lily ran to her side, crying. "Grace, please be okay," she whimpered. She wrapped her arms around Grace, trying to shield her from the wind. Grace tried to smile at her, but winced again as another wave of pain hit. Andrew noticed Grace collapse. Something snapped inside him. He lunged toward her with a furious shout. Evan reacted instantly. He scrambled to his feet and charged at Andrew, tackling him before he reached Grace. Both men fell hard onto the snow. Evan struck Andrew's arm, forcing him to release his grip on the ground. Andrew flailed, kicking wildly, but his foot slipped on the icy surface. His weight shifted. His balance broke. The snow beneath him gave way, revealing a hidden dip in the terrain. Andrew tumbled backward into a deep pocket between two fallen logs. Snow poured over him as he slid down, yelling in rage and confusion. He clawed at the edges, trying to climb out, but the snow was too loose, and his limbs too exhausted from the cold. Evan stepped back, breathing hard. He moved quickly to Grace and lifted her gently from the ground. Lily clung to his leg, still crying. "We need to move," Evan whispered to Grace. She nodded, tears freezing on her cheeks from pain and cold. A distant glow swept through the trees. Headlights, police searchlights, voices calling names through the storm. Officers pushed through the snow, their flashlights catching Andrew's figure as he tried desperately to pull himself from the hollow. He yelled and cursed, but his strength had drained away with the cold. The officers reached him first. They pulled him out, pinned him down, and cuffed his hands behind him. Andrew fought weakly, still shouting Grace's name until the wind swallowed his voice. Evan held Grace close as she finally broke into sobs. Her forehead pressed into his shoulder while Lily wrapped her arms around both of them. Police lights painted the snowy forest in blue and red pulses. Officers hurried toward them, calling for medical assistance. Grace cried harder in Evan's arms, finally letting the fear and exhaustion leave her body. She felt Lily's small hands gripping her tightly. She felt Evan's warmth surrounding her in the middle of the frozen forest. She felt, for the first time in weeks, that she might survive this nightmare. The storm continued to roar, but the forest no longer felt hopeless. She was safe. Evan had stood his ground, and the flashing police lights washed the snow with a promise that the danger was finally ending. The ambulance raced through the snowy roads, leading away from the forest, heading toward the small regional hospital at the edge of the mountains. Grace lay on the stretcher with her hands wrapped protectively around her stomach. She could feel the faint flutter of movement from the baby, a reminder that she needed to stay strong. Evan held her hand during the entire ride, refusing to leave her side. Lily sat beside him, her face still pale from fear. Yet her eyes never left Grace, as if watching over her offered some kind of protection. When they arrived at the hospital, nurses guided them into a quiet examination room. The atmosphere inside was warm compared to the frozen world they had escaped. Doctors rushed in with calm urgency. They checked Grace's oxygen levels, blood pressure, and heart rate. After a few minutes, they placed a fetal monitor on her stomach. The room fell silent as everyone listened to the fast, rhythmic heartbeat echo through the speakers. Grace exhaled shakily. The doctor smiled gently and confirmed that the baby was safe for now, though Grace needed absolute rest. Her body had endured too much stress and cold. She needed warmth, care, and time. While Grace rested with Lily sitting close beside her bed, police escorted Andrew to the county detention center. His hands were cuffed, his face was red from cold and humiliation. The officers did not listen to his protests or excuses. They had seen enough. They had witnessed him screaming in the snow forest with uncontrollable fury. They had watched him refuse treatment and resist arrest. He was no longer a husband defending himself from lies. He was a suspect in an attempted murder case. The entire county now knew his name for all the wrong reasons. Meanwhile, officers found Lila in her car near the state border. She had been hiding behind the wheel with bags packed in the back seat. She claimed she had been planning to visit her family, but the timing made her story collapse immediately. She was pulled out of the car and placed in a patrol vehicle. She cried and begged for leniency, insisting she had no idea what Andrew had been planning. The officers did not believe her. Not after everything that had surfaced. By midday, the charges against both Andrew and Lila were formally announced. Attempted murder, conspiracy, endangerment of a pregnant woman, arson. The weight of the legal accusations sent shockwaves through the town. News channels picked up the story within hours. When reporters learned that a pregnant woman had survived a burning car, a hospital attack, and a chase through a blizzard, they raced to find her. Grace was resting when the first wave of cameras arrived in the hospital lobby. Evan stepped into the hallway and spoke with staff, insisting that she not be overwhelmed. But Grace overheard the commotion. She knew what it meant. People wanted to hear her story. People wanted the truth. She had been silent for too long, terrified of speaking up. But now Andrew was in custody. Lila was detained. Evan and Lily were safe. And most importantly, her baby was alive. Grace took a deep breath and told the nurse she was ready to speak. When she stepped into the small press area the hospital had arranged, camera lights turned toward her. Reporters leaned forward with their microphones. Grace sat in a chair with Evan beside her. Lily stood behind them with her hands resting on Evan's shoulder. Grace began slowly. She told them about the fire. She described the moment Andrew locked the doors of the SUV and soaked the ground with gasoline. She described his cold expression as he walked away. She told them about the hospital attack at 2 a.m. when he tried to pull out her oxygen tube. She told them about fleeing through the snow, the confrontation in the forest, and Andrew's violence when he found them. Her voice trembled, but she kept going. The truth spilled out like a long-held breath finally released. The reporters listened with wide eyes. Camera operators zoomed in. Nurses who were passing by froze in place to hear her words. The truth was no longer hidden. Grace had finally spoken. Within minutes, social media exploded with reactions. A hashtag appeared almost instantly, "Justice for Grace." Thousands of people began sharing it. Domestic violence survivors posted messages of solidarity. Women who had suffered in silence felt their voices echoed in Grace's. Men who had seen the brutality of controlling partners spoke about the danger women face behind closed doors. The story crossed state lines within hours. News stations played the footage of Evan carrying Grace from the burning vehicle. Commentators called him a hero. Some reported on his past as a firefighter. Others highlighted the tenderness of the moment when he shielded her in the forest with only his body. The story grew from a local crime to a national headline. Support organizations reached out to the hospital, offering assistance, legal resources, counseling, and protection. They wanted Grace to know she was not alone. They wanted her baby to be safe. They wanted justice to move forward without hesitation. In another part of town, Lila sat in an interrogation room. When confronted with the evidence against her, she broke down completely. Through her tears, she blamed Andrew. She claimed he manipulated her. She insisted she had no idea the situation would become violent. She begged for mercy, trying to reduce her role in the crime. Cameras outside the station captured images of her being led out in handcuffs. Her sobbing face filled television screens across the country. Andrew's lawyer made a public statement soon after. He told reporters that Andrew had experienced a momentary loss of control. He said Andrew needed mental evaluation and compassion. The public reacted with outrage. People demanded accountability, not excuses. Back at the hospital, Grace sat with Evan during a live interview. When asked how she survived everything, she lifted her hand and placed it over Evan's. Her voice softened as she said, "He saved both me and my baby. He protected us when no one else did. He gave us a chance to live." Lily stepped closer, wrapping her small arms around Grace's shoulders. Cameras captured the moment. It spread immediately across social media. Millions watched it. Millions felt something stir in their hearts. Grace's truth had finally been heard. And now the country demanded justice. The courthouse was already surrounded by news vans when the sun rose. Reporters stood in heavy coats while cameras focused on the entrance doors, ready to capture every second of what many called the most significant criminal trial the county had seen in years. Inside, security officers checked everyone who approached the courtroom. The gravity of the case hung in the air like a weight. Andrew was brought in through a secured corridor. His wrists were cuffed, and his face carried the pale, angry exhaustion of a man who had lost control of everything. He glanced toward the crowd but found no sympathy in the eyes around him. Moments later, Lila arrived in a security vehicle. Her hands were cuffed tightly, and she stepped out, trembling as reporters shouted her name. Officers guided her into the building. She kept her head down, aware that every camera captured her fall from the glamorous life she once displayed proudly. Inside the courtroom, the public seats filled quickly. Every row was packed with journalists, local residents, legal observers, and people who had followed Grace's story from the beginning. Whispered conversations echoed across the room until the bailiff called for silence. Evan and Grace entered the courtroom together and took their seats in the first row. Grace wore a calm expression, though her hands shook slightly as she placed them on her stomach. The baby's steady movements reminded her that she was fighting for more than her own justice. Evan sat beside her, prepared to testify again. His protective presence made her feel grounded, even as the tension of the room pressed upon her. The trial began with the prosecutor presenting the foundation of the case. He started with the footage from the hospital. The large screen flickered to life as the video showed Andrew entering the room, approaching the bed where Grace slept, and reaching for the oxygen tube. The jury leaned forward. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Andrew stared at the floor. The prosecutor explained every detail, emphasizing the intent and danger. Then he moved to the second piece of footage. The snow forest confrontation appeared on the screen. The jury watched Andrew shouting, lunging, and fighting Evan, while Grace collapsed in pain. The silence in the room grew deeper. Next came Lila's involvement. She was called to the stand. Her face was streaked with tears as she looked at the jurors. She explained how Andrew had manipulated her. She admitted that she helped him on several occasions and claimed she never believed he would truly hurt Grace. She insisted she only acted out of fear and confusion. The prosecutor questioned her carefully. She eventually stated that Andrew had forced her to help him escape, and she hoped that admitting the truth would reduce her sentencing. Her testimony filled the courtroom with a heavy sense of betrayal. Andrew's attorney attempted to counter the accusations. He argued that Andrew had suffered a momentary psychological collapse. He painted Andrew as a man overwhelmed by pressure, not a criminal. But the evidence stood firm. Every word of testimony, every recorded attack, every medical report contradicted the defense. The courtroom sensed it. Even the jurors seemed unconvinced by the argument of temporary panic. When Grace was called to the stand, the entire courtroom seemed to stop breathing. She rose slowly and walked to the witness chair. She placed her hand on her stomach as she raised the other to take the oath. The jury watched her intently. Her voice trembled at first, but she steadied herself. She described the night Andrew locked her inside the burning car. She described the panic, the flames, the fear she felt for her unborn child. She described the hospital attack and the moment she realized Andrew wanted her gone completely. The courtroom was silent. The judge leaned forward. Grace's words flowed with a raw honesty that pierced every heart listening. The prosecutor asked her to describe the confrontation in the forest. She recounted how Evan carried her through the snow, how Lily tried to comfort her, how Andrew appeared out of the darkness demanding control. When she described Andrew pushing her down and the pain ripping through her body, several jurors visibly reacted. Her voice broke when she spoke of thinking she might lose her child. She wiped her tears and continued until she had told everything she endured. Evan took the stand next. His steady voice contrasted with the emotion in Grace's. He spoke about the fire, the rescue, the hospital confrontation, and finally the battle in the forest. His testimony carried the clarity of a man who had lived every event with full awareness of the danger. He answered each question carefully and with precision. When asked why he risked himself, he looked toward Grace and said simply that no decent person could leave her behind. Expert witnesses followed. A fire investigator stated that the SUV had been deliberately set on fire. A medical specialist described the dangers Grace and her unborn child had faced. The evidence grew heavier with each testimony. Every detail pointed toward a pattern of intentional harm. At one point, Andrew erupted during questioning. He shouted that everyone was lying, that Grace had ruined his life, that Evan had manipulated her. His voice was sharp with rage. Officers stepped forward immediately, as the judge ordered him to sit and remain silent. The jury watched the outburst carefully. It revealed more truth than any testimony could. Outside the courthouse, a large crowd chanted, "Justice for Grace." Reporters delivered updates every hour. The nation waited for the outcome. Inside the courtroom, Grace reached for Evan's hand. She was shaking. The judge prepared to send the jury into deliberation. Andrew glared at her with hatred as officers prepared to escort him out. Lila cried softly at her table, realizing the weight of her choices and the life she had destroyed. The courtroom felt suspended in time. Grace held onto Evan's hand and whispered a silent prayer. Everything depended on what would happen next. The jury returned after 4 intense hours of deliberation, their faces solemn as they filed into the silent courtroom. Every seat was filled, and every breath seemed held at once. Grace tightened her hands around her stomach, while Evan kept his arms steady behind her, bracing for whatever decision awaited them. Andrew stood between 2 officers as the verdict was read. The courtroom felt colder when the judge announced the sentence of life imprisonment without any possibility of parole. Andrew's expression twisted with disbelief, but no one looked away. Justice, long delayed, had finally arrived for Grace and the child she protected. Lila entered moments later, escorted by guards, her wrists secured as she faced the courtroom with shaking shoulders. The judge delivered her sentence as well, declaring 25 years in state prison for her role as accomplice and for attempting to flee prosecution. The weight of her actions finally collapsed upon her. The moment the final words were spoken, Grace broke down in tears. Her body trembled with the release of months of terror. Evan reached for her instantly and wrapped his arms around her, while Lily leaned forward from the bench to hold both of them, creating a circle of warmth amid the courtroom's tension. Reporters rushed outside to deliver breaking headlines, and within minutes, major news outlets broadcast the victory of justice nationwide. The public felt a collective sense of triumph as they watched the coverage. Many had followed every step of Grace's struggle and now celebrated the decision with overwhelming support and renewed compassion. After medical staff confirmed she was well enough to leave, Grace was discharged with specific instructions to rest and avoid stress. Evan drove her and Lily back toward the cabin, taking slow care through the mountain roads. The snow had softened, and sunlight filtered through the trees like an invitation toward a gentler life. Back at the cabin, Grace felt the baby kick with more strength than she had in days. The sensation brought a soft smile to her face. She placed Evan's hand gently over her stomach so he could feel it too. Lily watched with bright wonder, her relief blossoming into joy as she sensed the moment's safety. Over the next few days, the community sent an outpouring of gifts to the cabin. Boxes arrived filled with blankets, baby clothes, letters of encouragement, and small handmade items. Grace read each message slowly, touched by the kindness of strangers who had followed her story. The generosity wrapped the household in comfort. Evan spent the afternoon repairing the damaged door that Andrew had tried to force open during the storm. He measured the frame carefully and replaced the broken panels, wanting the cabin to feel secure again. Grace watched him from the window, grateful for the patience and quiet dedication he brought into every task he completed. Inside, Lily painted a colorful picture using her small set of watercolor brushes. When she finished, she proudly taped it to the living room wall. The drawing showed 3 figures holding hands under a bright sun. She called it her new family picture, and the simplicity of it made Grace's eyes fill with warm tears. That evening, Grace insisted on helping prepare a small dinner. She moved slowly but deliberately as she chopped vegetables and stirred soup while Evan handled the heavier tasks. The scent of warm herbs filled the cabin. Lily set the table with careful hands, proud to contribute. Together, they created a peaceful atmosphere. As the sun began to set, a golden light poured through the windows. The glow softened every surface it touched, giving the room a gentle radiance. Grace paused by the counter and breathed deeply, letting herself absorb the moment. Peace, something she feared she would never feel again, finally settled warmly around her. Evan walked over and placed his hand lightly on Grace's stomach. He waited, and within seconds, he felt the baby push back in a firm little kick. His eyes softened with amazement. He looked at Grace and saw renewed strength in her expression. She smiled at him with gratitude that words could never fully capture. Lily climbed onto a small wooden chair and leaned close to Grace's belly. She pressed her ear gently against the fabric of Grace's sweater and listened with pure fascination. When she heard the rhythmic movement, she giggled softly and clapped her hands. The sound filled the room with a sweetness that softened every worry. Evan stood behind them, feeling the quiet weight of everything they had survived. He placed one hand on Lily's shoulder and another on Grace's back. The small family they had become felt real in that moment. The storm had taken so much, yet it had brought them together in a way none of them expected. He looked out the window at the fading colors of the sky. The forest stretched quietly beyond the cabin, its snowy branches glistening. Grace stepped beside him, leaning gently against his shoulder. She whispered her thanks for his courage and patience. He assured her she deserved peace, safety, and every bright moment still ahead. Evan turned toward her and held her close. Lily joined the embrace with a bright smile. The 3 of them stood together in the center of the room, sharing warmth and hope. Grace felt the baby move again, reminding her that life continued to grow inside her despite every hardship they had faced together. The cabin felt like a sanctuary. Grace breathed calmly for the first time in so long. Evan placed a blanket around her shoulders and guided her toward the couch. Lily climbed beside them, resting her head on Grace's arm. The peaceful stillness wrapped around the 3 of them like a promise of something better. Outside, twilight settled over the snow as the cabin grew quiet. Grace whispered that she finally felt free. Evan held her hand while Lily leaned against her, their small family embracing the calm evening that promised a future.